Hello and welcome to tonight's Get in Tune. I'm Michael Gracia, and I have a really exciting show tonight, especially for all you animation fans out there. I have a guy with me tonight who's had a very long career, basically as long as I've been alive. So I'm really excited because he's worked on a lot of projects that I grew up watching and loving, and helped inspired me. So in a way, he's part of the reason I went into cartooning, animation, comics, all that. So let me bring on Tom Sito. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Doing good. How are you?
Very good, very good.
Thank you for coming on.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you guys watching, down at the bottom is Tom's website. He'll be scrolling throughout the whole thing. Feel free to check it out, but don't leave the show. Wait till after the show to check it out. I'm also going to add into the comments his IMDb page, which let me just get for you here. And
I always like to modestly say I worked on all the Disney movies that don't suck. So.
And but it is true. You worked on. I mean, come on, Lion King, Aladdin, Little Mermaid. You were there for all that. And I mean, when you ask people what their favorite Disney films are, a lot of them go to those. That's true. You were there at a great time. But I mean, and we're going to get into the stuff that you worked on, and there's some stuff I really am excited to talk about. But before we get into that, I'd like to know a little bit more about you, your background, kind of just tell us a little bit how you got into art, not just professionally, but growing up. Who were some of your influences? What were you watching or reading? What was it that got you into that?
Well, I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. My father was a fireman, and my uncles and stuff were all truck drivers on the Brooklyn waterfront. This is back before Brooklyn was cool. Back when Brooklyn was a dump, and I remember when I got into animation, my uncle Stanley, who was like a bald truck driver, who was a connoisseur of polka music, he'd look at me and he'd go, "So what do you do? What are you like Mickey Mouse? What are you going to draw like Mickey Mouse, right? Make money doing that?" Yeah. He just looked at me like, so they didn't really know what I was doing. But I think when I was a kid, I loved drawing, and I love making drawing cartoons and stuff. And in public school, you find out the class artist doesn't get beat up as much. So, but okay, this is good. I like this. And then I got into a magnet high school in Manhattan, the High School of Art and Design. Mm-hmm. That's like Ralph Bakshi and Keith Haring and all these people went to.
Yeah, I know people have graduated from there as well.
Yeah, and then from there on to the School of Visual Arts, and and in A&D is when they first showed me animation, because at first I wanted to do comic strips, because you got the Sunday funnies, and you sat and you read the newspapers all the time, and you go, oh, I want to do a comic strip. And and then when a friend showed me, what at Art and Design they showed me animation, and the first time I saw my characters come to life, I went, wow, that's cool. I want to do that. Like what an interesting thing. And in the beginning, I never thought like the Disney stuff was approachable. I always thought like that's so far beyond, and then I started to meet people who worked at the studio, and I worked people, older Disney artists. I was kind of fortunate that I began my career when a lot of golden age artists were ending their careers. So we kind of overlapped. So like in New York in 1976, there was a musical called the Adventures of Raggedy Ann and Andy.
Yeah. And
it was mostly done in New York. And that was kind of a fascinating overlap, because all the entry level jobs of assistants and in-betweeners and painters, they were all like in their 20s. And the senior, the master animators and art directors, they were all in their 60s. And there was nobody in between. There was very few people in between,
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's where I met Richard Williams, who later, directed the animation of Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Yep.
And the great thing with Dick was that Dick loved like pairing people up and training people and stuff. So like he had me assist Grim Natwick, and it's like Grim Natwick was the guy who created Betty Boop. Like he sat down on a blank piece of paper and designed Betty Boop, you know, and like he helped Chuck Jones. He helped Chuck Jones learn how to animate. You know, it's just like, you know, and Mark Davis, who created Cruella de Vil and Maleficent. You know, it's like, you know, so he was like 87 and I was like 20, 19 even, and I was absolutely terrified. Like I had this like heart palpitation through the whole thing. It's like, please, I don't want to screw up, you know. And it was really nice, actually. So but just to have a chance, you know, and Art, got to work with Art Babbitt, who created Goofy, you know, and the Wicked Queen and Snow White.
Yeah.
So it was a great chance for get a chance to work with all these wonderful people. And then I did some commercials and stuff in New York. I had a chance to work with a guy named Sheamus Culhane.
I have his book somewhere.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Sheamus was he was writing it while I was working with him. I remember,
really?
I remember he was sitting at his desk with his manual typewriter, and actually in my book about the history of computer graphics, I noticed that Sheamus used to like to go over to the New York Institute of Technology out in Old Westbury, where there was a bunch of scientists working on developing animation by computer. Like, ooh, it's a strange thing, And I remember, like, I was sitting at my desk working on stuff, and Sheamus was writing, and and Sheamus had started in silent film. He had started in like the 20s, and worked for Fleischer and worked for Disney and all these places in early television. But I remember, like, he came back from New York Tech, and he looked up at me at one point from his computer, and he goes, from his typewriter, and he goes, computers are coming. They're going to change everything. The business will never look the same. And I'm like, that's nice, old man, lie down. Have some Wheatina, And it's like, I didn't know. And it's like, he's right. He was absolutely right.
Yeah.
Because like some of the kids working at New York Tech that he was talking to was like Ed Catmull, who went on to become the head of Pixar, and Alvin Smith and all these people who all became like basically the engineering backbone of Pixar. And started there, and then after Star Wars and stuff, George Lucas enticed them all out to the West Coast and everything to become the Lucasfilm Graphics Group.
Wow,
so,
that's amazing.
So the cross currents are fascinating, just to see where everybody was and all.
Well, that's one of those things where I'm not, like I said backstage, I've never worked for the companies to the level that you've worked from, but it is a small industry in a way where everyone just, you meet someone, they know someone, they introduce, like that's just what it is. You end up knowing all these people.
Yeah. It's like the animators. It's kind of like stunt people. The people that do stunts, they all know each other. And it's all like, oh yeah, Yakima. Nobody can fall off a horse like Yakima can, and and it's the same thing with us. Like, with all the social media now and all, we stay in contact with everybody. So, people that I worked with in Taipei and in London and Canada and stuff, we're still all connected, and it's that common love of just, we love to make cartoons, and it's a kick to sit in a theater with an audience full of people you'll never meet, and they're laughing at your jokes. I'm like, oh, yeah, like it. Okay.
No, that is a good feeling. It's actually one of the reasons I got into puppetry years ago, was because being a cartoonist or animator or whatever I was doing, I was handed off to someone. I never heard feedback, but performing live, I was able to hear if people laughed, cried, whatever I wanted them to do. Did they get the reaction? So it was kind of a nice thing for me when I went into puppetry.
Yeah, and the nice thing is, like, when I moved out to Hollywood finally, and and I was working out here, there's still a little bit of that small townishness, which is interesting, because like Sheamus, he was married like several times, and I think his second wife was the daughter of Chico Marx. So he actually married into the Marx Brothers.
That's hysterical.
And I said, what would they like? And he says, well, when they take their makeup off, when they took their makeup off, you couldn't tell them apart. They all looked alike. And he says, and they're all a big bunch of horse players. So he says, early in the morning, I would go downstairs to the kitchen, and all the brothers are around the table with racing charts and cigars. And then I'm thinking about like who they're going to bet on at Hollywood Park, in the second race and all that. And he's like, it's morning. It's like, oh, cigars. He's like, oh God.
That's great. I know that. I mean, that that's a time too. That's just so interesting. Like history for me of old like Hollywood is very interesting. I love. Thank you for sharing a story like that. I love that type of stuff. So when you first got started, you were doing the Raggedy Ann and Andy, correct? Was that your first actual project? Because yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, like the very first project was on a little educational film. Like there was a little company on 19th Street near the first Barnes and Noble, the original Barnes and Noble on 19th and 5th Avenue, and it was it was a film to teach children about nutrition. So it was like, let's hippity hop to Nutrition Land or something like that. That was like the first one, and then Reagan was the second one and stuff.
And eventually you moved out to Hollywood, and you worked on a ton of stuff. You've been part of Filmation, Hanna-Barbera, Disney, Warner Brothers. Because IMDb is a little messed up here. I'm just looking. So you kind of first went, from what I'm looking at, it says you worked as a story director on Rubik the Amazing Cube. So that was like Hanna-Barbera, correct? I believe?
That was the H&B. Yeah, that was just like freelance storyboard. I don't know where they got story supervisor from.
Okay, so. I don't know. It's like I said, IMDb always has some weird.
It does have some weird stuff on there.
No, I'm just saying because as a kid, I remember watching that. I remember watching Saturday Supercade, where it says you were a story director on as well. Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, He-Man, Challenge of the GoBots, Ghostbusters. Like the Filmation was a huge part of my childhood. So it was,
the crazy thing about the He-Man show was that at the time, it's like like in '82 we had like a labor strike, and then there was a recession, and there wasn't a lot of work in town and stuff, and I think Don Bluth's studio had relocated to Ireland and all, and the Disney had just finished like the Black Cauldron, which flopped, and so there wasn't a lot. And then Filmation had this big series, with this guy, and the original story about He-Man was that those dolls, those figurines, were all supposed to be merchandising for Conan the Barbarian, the movie, the John Milius movie. And that was a deal that the studio Paramount had with Mattel. But then John Milius delivered an R-rated movie. He delivered like a much more sexual and violent movie than they thought. And they're like, wait a minute, we got warehouses in China full of these figures. What are we going to do with that stuff? So they go, let's give it another name. Or just change the name to something. And when I was working on the series, I remember turning to the artist next to me and going, the name of this isn't really He-Man, right? That's like a temp title. It's going to be like Ragnar or Karnak, something guttural. And he goes, no, it's He-Man. Okay.
Hey, listen, it worked.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, of all the stuff I worked on in the 80s, it's like 35 years later, I still get invited to fan conventions. There's a huge, He-Man
PowerCon.
PowerCons, and in fact, I think I just turned one down right now, just on a scheduling thing. But it was very sweet of them. But God bless, like people really connected with that series. And
I was one of those kids who had the toys before the series came on. So for me, He-Man was the mini comics, that I got, and I was. God, what was I? Because those toys I think came out in '81 or '82. The show premiered in '83. Yeah. So I was maybe 6 years old, so I couldn't even read the comics really. I just remember looking at the pictures and knowing there was a difference between what I was seeing in the comics and in the show, and then eventually the show became my He-Man. But before that, I don't think you worked on it. Before that, Filmation did a show called Black Star, which was like the precursor to He-Man. And I believe the reason why Filmation got He-Man was because of Black Star.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So, but that, and to me, that was one of my all-time favorite. I think I had more Black Star figures than He-Man figures, to be honest with you. And I think the reason I bought the He-Man was, even though they were a little different in size, they looked similar. Like I think they matched up. Like maybe Black Star was a little taller, but they kind of had that same feeling in design of fantasy barbarian type of stuff. So I bought them to play with my Black Star figures, really. So that's why I had those.
Yeah. They were fun characters to throw around. You know, it was great to do all that. You know, that physical action, and you know, the studio. I mean, like Lou Scheimer, our head guy. He had made his name with the Archies. You know, that was all. You know, sugar, da 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 da. That was like his big thing, but the He-Man show was like such a big hit for them, and they were very proud of saying that He-Man was like a wholesome family show. That even though they're barbarians, He-Man never uses the sword to actually chop anybody or stab anybody or anything like that. He always like picks up Beast Man and throws him 3 miles, and there's always a mud puddle, you know, or a bale of hay for him to land in, you know. And we used to get a fan mail from mail from fans and stuff, and kids were always drawing He-Man sawing Skeletor's head off and you know, like slitting his throat and spitting down the hole and all these violent things, and you're like, oh my god,
I can't imagine. I mean, I used to draw watching, but one of the things that I did as a kid is in the intro when He-Man throws that punch, I'd pretend he punched me and throw myself back. So, like that, I think that was the craziest thing I did. We got a comment, and maybe you know the answer to this, from Christian. Did Bruce Timm start out on He-Man? I know he worked on one of the comics, or multiple comics, maybe.
I think so. I think he was. I think he was a writer and everything. Started writing on that originally. Another person who was working in writing at that time was Michael Struzzinski, who later created Babylon 5 and stuff. Yeah. You know, he was working on the series for a long time. So
I had during that whole era of the 80s, my favorite, and I didn't know this until later researching like who's doing the writing of the stories. Like my favorite animated writer for like sci-fi fantasy stuff was Michael Reeves. I don't know if you know him or remember him. But
I remember a little bit, not very well.
He had a really strong sense of fantasy in his storytelling. So anything that was like a high fantasy episode was usually a Michael Reeves episode, and those tended to be my favorite. But yeah, no, I mean, and I was gonna ask, because it says you did storyboarding on He-Man. Did you ever do any of the animation on it, or because I know you are an animator as well, so.
Yeah. When you know, because the way production would go when storyboards at the very beginning, and so when the season work would be completed, and rather than get laid off, I said, I'll do animate. I'll animate now. So then I went over and I did animation. And they always used to get, because of my own drawing ability and stuff, they would give me like a little more physical stuff, like He-Man punching holes in walls, and do more physical stuff, tearing things apart and stuff like that. So those were kind of fun. Cool. The things that you had to, there's a certain amount of like physical scenes that you tried to do, you sort of save your resources and everything. So you use a lot of like stock shots, which is the mouths, people talking, or I was like the stock scene of He-Man holding his sword and going.
Yeah, I would.
I never knew what that was for, but we had it, but you get that in, and that would give you the ability to then save it for a couple of good scenes where you wanted to put a lot of like full animation in it. And it's funny because our production head, Joe Mazuka, came out of live action, And he was like a script supervisor, or he was an AD under Franklin Schaffner when they made Patton. And he was telling me a story about because when I started directing at Filmation, he was talking to me about this idea about saving your resources for the scenes that count. And he says, Tommy, I don't want to bring up war stories, but when I was with Frank Schaffner and Patton, he says, you know how much time it took him to film the battle scenes? He goes, 1 day. Schaffner was like, battle scenes, big deal. They all look the same. Bomb goes off, tank goes here, tank goes there, the guys run, the stuntmen fly through the air. All those things look the same. He says, this is not a war movie. This is a character piece. So he says, George C. Scott standing in front of that flag talking, 3 days of like 10-hour shoots to get like 5 minutes.
Wow.
Because he says, that's what I wanted to focus on. And really, it's an iconic scene. That's the scene that everybody remembers from that movie.
Yeah.
So lesson learned.
That's a good tip, though. That's a great tip.
Yeah.
So I was actually going to ask you about working with the stock footage at Filmation. Filmation was known for it. I mean, they were the last company to keep animation in America fully. I believe the only cartoon they sent overseas was Zorro. I remember reading somewhere. But they reused so much footage.
Yeah.
I've always been curious, how much animation per episode was there a rule you can only use this amount of stock footage, or?
Well, in storyboard, we were told that we had to get at least between 30 and 35% of the show stock.
Okay.
And so we had to get like that much, and then the other stuff would be new footage. Okay. And there was always like sort of stock openings of like, the first time you see Castle Grayskull, or the first time you pan through the city, or you go to like Skeletor's lair. And everything. Those are good time wasters. You spend a lot of time with that. Until you get to the action.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I was just curious. I never heard that before. You even worked on. Excuse me. You even worked on for them. I'm just looking. You were part of the Ghostbusters series. I believe She-Ra was part of your work there.
I was directing on She-Ra. So,
But you worked on one that is like probably my second favorite Filmation cartoon that I don't think gets enough credit. Brave Star.
Oh yeah.
Where it says you were storyboard consultant. I have to go through the other stuff, but what else did you do? Anything else besides storyboards for Brave Star?
I think I directed a couple of episodes of them. Of that series.
Oh yes, okay. I see 7 episodes. It says here.
Yeah, and that was a fun show. Because it's like you got the feeling that when He-Man hit, Mattel was so surprised they were kind of like, let's try this again. So do She-Ra. So okay, so that's we got He-Man. This is She-Man. And then we get the Brave Star, and it's like in indigenous tribes man, like Native American man, let's see what we could do. But the fun thing about doing the Western in outer space and everything, that was kind of neat with the outer space gunfighters and all that kind of stuff, characters.
Yeah. That's exactly what I love. I grew up watching reruns of like Gunsmoke and stuff with my grandfather. He didn't speak any English, but he loved television. So I grew up watching Westerns with him, and I loved that type of stuff. So when I'm a big sci-fi geek and stuff. So when Brave Star came, it just hit like everything I enjoyed. So that to me was one of and that was, I think, their last show they did.
Yeah. There was a whole, because they were doing movies also. They did the Pinocchio and the Emperor of the Night, and this other one with Snow White, but that was the era of the 80s when large companies were buying one another and all.
Yeah,
and what happened was I think the company that owned Filmation sold them to L'Oreal Nestle. And L'Oreal Nestle was just looking for companies like there was a sort of like a predatory kind of way where you would buy a company bankrupt it, sell off its assets, and then take the tax write-off. And I think that's what they were doing with this company. They wanted, because Lou kept his library of films, and the first cable stations were coming online, and like Hanna-Barbera and Warner Brothers had sold off their library a long time ago to syndication.
Yeah.
So that's why you saw Flintstones and Bugs Bunny and stuff everywhere. Filmation kind of kept its library, but then Nestle's wanted it for European cable stations like Sky TV and things like that. So so they really bought the company for the library rather than the existing studio.
Interesting.
I
didn't know that.
Right around this time, right around that exact same time, that's when Disney, when Eisner and Katzenberg, and when the takeover happened at Disney, the first time the Paramount executives looked at Disney, they were like, "Why do we still have an animation unit? Why don't we just shut it down and live off the licensing, and then we'll outsource, whatever." Yeah. And it was Roy Disney who's just said, "No, we're always going to do animation. We're never going to not do animation."
That was one of the best things that ever happened. I mean, how many great movies followed?
Yeah.
And you were part of, I mean, I'd have to go in, but I mean, we named it, Aladdin, Little Mermaid, Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, Pocahontas. I mean, the top like 5, 6 that just first came out, you were on in different roles, correct?
Yeah. At that time and stuff, a lot of artists of my generation and all, we loved all the old stuff, like Pinocchio and Bambi and Tex Avery and Bugs Bunny. And we wanted to do stuff like that, but everything was the Saturday morning, So we were always looking for interesting projects to work on, And when Roger Rabbit popped up, it was like, wow, and it was actually in London and everything. Like there was a unit here in LA, but the majority of it was done in London. And again, Richard Williams, the guy who directed Raggedy Ann and everything, that was like my connection with them. And so we all worked together on that one afterwards. And then I came back to LA after that, So, but to work on a high quality film that reached audiences, like that, because for a long time people thought like, well, adults won't go to animation, like adults won't see animation. And really, the turnaround started in '88 and '89, because at the same time, Roger Rabbit came out in '88, Mermaid came out in '89. At the same time, I remember packing my bags to go to London, and I was talking with a good friend of mine named David Silverman, and David was just starting on these interstitials for the Tracy Ullman show, and he said, "Yeah, it's going to be this sitcom like the Flintstones." And I go, "Well, David, what's it called?" And he goes, "The Simpsons." And I go, "Well, David, that doesn't sound funny. It's just a name, the Wellingtons, the Andersons. Get a real job." It's like, wrong. I'm wrong. Yeah. It turned out to like the most successful franchise in television history.
Still running.
30 years later, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Before that, like the Flintstones was like 6 seasons.
Yeah.
The Jetsons was like 2 seasons. Yeah. But they just ran them to death in reruns. But my God, 31 years now without, and it said Conan O'Brien was a Simpsons writer. It was like somebody, Larry David did some writing on the Simpsons. It's just a self-perpetuating engine, that just keeps going, and it's just like phenomenal.
And I'm still a regular viewer of the show. I mean, I need to catch up a little bit, but that's what Disney Plus is for now.
Yeah. It's very hard to, people have written books about, how to predict a hit, and it's really hard to say like what's going to be the next big thing. Like I tell my students, like before Pirates of the Caribbean came out, you couldn't get arrested with a pirate movie. You showed up at a studio with a script, and they go, "What's this? Pirates?" They go, "Get out of here with that." Cutthroat Island sank Carolco. It's just no. Then Pirates of the Caribbean come out. Pirates are cool. Before Gladiator came out, movies about Greeks and Romans, the industry's slang is sword and sandal flicks. So it's like, sword and sandal films. It's like, I want to make a movie about Spartacus or something. They go, get out of that shit. That's like what the '60s with Steve Reeves. Like nobody does that. Then Gladiator came out. Okay,
Everyone wants that.
300, Spartacus, all the Rome, all that stuff that came out after. And, zombies are hot now. So it's trying to predict the next great thing. It's an art.
Yeah. I just want to say hi to Mike Wilkie in the crowd. He's a regular viewer, awesome cartoonist. So hey, Mike. But yeah, no, you're right. I mean, who knew? When the Simpsons first started, I'm not talking about their sitcom, but when they were the bumpers on the Tracy Ullman show.
Yeah.
God, I don't even know. I could have been maybe 10 years old, right? I don't remember when the show premiered. It was
89.
89. So I was 13, so it was somewhere between 10 and 13.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my father did not like the Tracy Ullman show. He thought it was somebody my age should not be watching it. Yeah. So I had a TV in my bedroom. My bedroom was next to my parents, so I'd turn it really low. And I'd go up close to the TV, and I really only watched it to watch the bumpers of The Simpsons. And that's the only, because for me, I grew up loving anime. I recorded like every cartoon out there because I really wanted to learn anime. And this is before I had books or anything on the topic. And I would just draw what I saw on the TV, and that's kind of how I learned to cartoon a bit. But I try to play back in slow motion to see if I can catch how the anime, and this is on VCR, so you're really seeing like these weird jumps and stuff, and I was trying to teach myself, and it wasn't might have been before this, but it definitely, I can remember when the Little Mermaid came out, and there was the huge deal made, and they were going, this is behind the scenes at Disney Studios, and you get to see a little tour and how things were done. And I was like, oh, that's how it's made. So I started making the worst flip books you'd ever see, and just things. But that's what I was teaching myself. I went to school for it, but I'm pretty much a self-taught animator. But it's and I think I'm going to sidetrack here for a second. But that's I'm sorry, I just brain farted here where I was going with this. But looking at all this stuff, and I'm gonna move on because I totally forgot what I was gonna say. I'm sorry.
I mean, actually, talking about the Simpsons thing.
That's where we're going with.
One of the interesting things that friends who worked on the Simpsons were telling me was that in that interstitials day, they were trying to convince James Brooks to do a primetime series, because there hadn't been a primetime animated series in 25 years. I think I think Calvin and the Colonel is on 1970, or and Hanna-Barbera tried Where's Huddles, and wait till your father
that's those.
But they didn't do very well. There was just barely a season, they were dead, and so really there was no prime time for 25 years, and the industry people were like, oh yeah, people won't watch cartoons at night, and the interesting thing was with the Tracy Ullman show was the way they normally do, like when you're in a live audience at a sitcom, before they even start, sometimes a comic comes out and warms up the crowd and does stand up and everything before the show begins. Well, after a while with the Simpsons, rather than waste time with a comic, they would just take a whole bunch of the animated bumpers and string them together and just run that for the audience.
Really?
And the audience howling and everything before they even started the show. And finally they told Brooks, I go, see, look, everybody likes this stuff even more than the regular show. And they're like, and I mean, the reason why they did the bumpers, to jump back even earlier, back to the old Monty Python days, Terry Gilliam, who he and I I didn't work with him personally, but we were both proteges of Harvey Kurtzman, and he said that when they first started doing the Monty Python show, instead of in between the skits, they would just have black. So the screen would go black, the sound would go dead, and there'd be nothing, and then it would start again. And they just found it sucked all the energy out of the show. The pacing disappeared, the energy disappeared, and you had to bring it all back again. And then it went black again. And it's just it was like a void. And so they said, we got to stick something in between the skits. to keep the energy level up. And so that's why he said he just grabbed a couple of things from a magazine and went to a down shooter camera and just started animating it. And so that's that idea of like bumpers between the shorts. And I think a lot of the Simpson stuff was kind of the same way. It's like a way to bridge those skits.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think for me, I think that I don't know if they were on in between skits. I thought they were just commercial, like in and outs to commercials. But I think it was a great way to give a good laugh on the way out and come in with a laugh to warm them up. So it's to me. I mean, listen, to me, The Simpsons might be one of the greatest things I've ever become obsessed with in my life.
Yeah. I mean, the most recent book that I'm writing right now is about the animation renaissance and just like this period between like 1986 and like about 1995, like about that 10-year period.
Yeah.
Where just all these big animated projects came out. Because like just that one year, like 1989, is like The Simpsons, Liquid Television, Eon Flux. Ren and Stimpy come out in 91. It's like all these things are all happening all in that same time period. And the other studios are kicking in with like Fern Gully and Space Jam and all. That's 91, and it's so it's just so much was happening in that one sort of stretch of time.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and we're going to talk a little because you used the word Renaissance and it refers to like the Disney Renaissance, and I'll talk to you about that in a minute. But you mentioned your book, so I want to talk about your books real quick that you've written. So I just want to share the screen and hold on, you got them right there. I was going to show the Amazon. I don't know if I know that one. The Eat Drink. What was that one?
Oh yeah. Well, what is this weird thing? I wrote a cookbook. So
you did.
It sounds like a completely goofy idea, but what happened was, I was talking with my editor about a book, and I said, when I assisted Grim Natwick, the guy who created Betty Boop, Grim was from Missouri originally, and he was very proud of his chili recipe. So he gave me his personal chili recipe, and I said, I got Grim Natwick's chili recipe, and I've also got Walt Disney's chili recipe. And a producer at Ghibli, is a friend of mine, gave me a Miyazaki's recipe for ramen, and because he cooks for the crew at night, and Bill Hanna used to cook Southwestern barbecue for his team, and I said, I can write a cookbook. And they go, what a crazy idea, So I started calling up, famous animators, and it's like, do you have a recipe? It's like, so Chuck Jones' family sent me one, and Michael Giacchino, the composer. I got, Pete Docter of Pixar. I've got I think several Oscar winners, several Emmy Award winners, and just, and they just said, oh yeah, I got something,
And is this available right now?
Oh yeah, it's on Amazon.
It's called Eat, Drink, Animate. The Animator's Code. I got to tell you. One of my I love to cook. If I didn't go into art full time, I would have gone into culinary. That's how much I love it. And I cook all the time. My wife doesn't cook at all. I do all the cooking. I love it. It's a hobby of mine. When I'm out of my studio and I want to do something creative that isn't drawing, I just kind of go play in the kitchen. So I need this book.
Yeah, you see, you put your finger on it, because when I was writing my book about computer history, and I talked to a lot of the pioneers of computer graphics, I noticed that when your full-time job is with something ethereal, like an image on a screen, something writing code or creating graphics, where people go to relax is something tactile. Like I noticed, like a lot of programmers I know like to garden, or they cook. Or they refinish furniture, so it's something I want to touch, want to physically, and I'm surprised how many artists and filmmakers like to cook, and it's just like, all right, and it's funny because the recipes go from it's about 75 recipes, and it goes from like 3 guys actually became professional chefs, like actually the head of storyboards on Toy Story, Robert Lentz, and everything, studied to be a professional cook. So he helped me with a lot of the recipes too. Like we tested them all together and stuff.
Oh, that's awesome.
Robert's really good. He's really, really good guy. He got his mother's sort of recipe for manigot, and all, and but so it goes from very complicated to very simple, because some of the artists who were around during the Great Depression, and
Yeah.
everything, like their ideas were much more Spartan. So like Ward Kimball, who created Jiminy Cricket,
Yeah.
his son John Kimball told me, he goes, yeah, Dad's idea at dinner was open up a can of hash, throw some peanuts in it, dinner. Like, okay. And also a lot of martinis, a lot of mixture. There's like Mary Blair's martini and Mark Davis's martini, and it's like,
Wow.
So actually, one last thing. There was a guy named John Schnepp who passed away last year, but he used to direct death metal videos,
Okay.
and that
Yeah.
thing, and he gave me a recipe for a thing called picklebacks, and
Picklebacks?
yeah. And a pickleback is a shot of bourbon and a shot of sour dill pickle juice, like throw back one, throw back the other.
Have you tried it?
No. Actually, some of my students love it, so it's like I don't judge.
Well, I'm looking at it on Amazon, you guys, right now. Paperback is $29.22. I think this might be in order before I go to bed. I gotta be honest with you. I really love being in the kitchen, so this will be a fun thing to read through.
I had a thing where like the director of Fern Gully, The Last Rainforest, she and her husband originally from Wisconsin, and they're like the real Wisconsinites, and she gave me a recipe for something called schmooze, which is like sort of like it's like sort of like pork chops in cheese sauce.
Wow. Okay.
Very Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And so she gave it the family recipe. And then and I was talking with her last week, and she says, yeah, my relatives call me up and say, how did you put it in the book again? I want to make sure, I want to get it right. And it's like, I said, oh my God, it's like we're big in Milwaukee. Yeah,
that's great. A couple of your other books that you've done, the ones that there are 3 that are on your website, just on the sidebar. They're Drawing the Line, The Untold Story of the Animation Unions from Bosco to Bart Simpson, Moving Innovation, A History of Computer Animation, and the other one you have that's up there, I think I moved it for the ink hold on, was Timing for Animation, I believe. Yeah. Which I think I have the Timing for Animation book somewhere around here. I remember reading that. Let's go with the history of computer animation first. Looking at that, what's it like? Because how do I put this? Okay, animation, and I've said this before. When you think about it, art-wise, is kind of new. It's over 100 years old, but it hasn't had many changes. At first it was, cut out paper, pins type of thing. Then it moves on to the cells, and it basically worked that way until color came into it and sound was added. And then all of a sudden we have the computers come in. And since the computers, it's really the software that's changed to make animation. What was it like researching how far back did you go in the history? When did you, what was it like kind of seeing the beginning parts? Because, and I hope, this isn't rude, but you kind of lived through the change too. You saw it, you saw it come, and how you went from traditional to computer and all that. So what was it like writing a book like that?
Yeah, well, like that. That's one of the things I was thinking about as I was writing it. I was in traditional animation, but all during my own career, I remember people saying computers are coming, computers are 10 years away. They're going to be here, and everybody said, okay, there's all this development happening, and sooner or later, they're going to figure it out. And so I did kind of watch it as it was happening. And when we were doing Who Framed Roger Rabbit, I thought we were doing at the time the most technologically advanced animated film yet. And it actually turns out we were doing one of the last animated films using the traditional methods of what they call matte and roto,
Okay.
which is when you like let's say I want to do a shadow level on Jessica Rabbit. So
Yeah.
what you do is that you animate Jessica, that's one level. Then an effects animator animates a shadow level, and that's painted black, and then it's shot at a percentage under the camera so that it's transparent. So it just gives like a gray tone. And Jessica had something like there's like half-tone shadows, quarter-tone shadows, and what they call rim lights, or like hot spots for like sort of the light. But they really tried to match the light to look like the people in the room. Like the way Bob Zemeckis, the director, talked to us. He says, "Look, I'm not making some damn cereal commercial here. You got to believe the rabbit's sitting in the chair next to Hoskins. If that doesn't look right, let's not make this movie." Yeah. So we tried very hard to match the light, and the very simple scenes were actually the hardest ones to do. After the movie wrapped, I was talking with the senior designer at ILM, and he says, it's one of the hardest pictures we've done. He says the space operas, we got that down. Spaceship, zap, you got that. But he says Jessica Rabbit running down an alleyway, throwing off a shadow, matching the real light, because that's really hard. And and when it looks perfect, you don't notice it. You just accept it. If it didn't look right, you would notice it. And those are the hardest things to do is reality. Because in space you make your own reality. But anyway, to make a long story longer, so as I was, when I was thinking of subjects like I was writing the book about the unions, I felt I needed to explain digital, because I had to say where digital was coming from. It's a different group, a different workforce. There was a lot of people coming from, they'd worked on government jobs, on flight simulators and things like that, and a lot of engineers, a lot of research people coming into the business, and side by side with the cartoon nerds, like us. And I found that I needed to explain a lot, and the chapter got bigger and bigger, and my editor cut it, and he goes, you got a new book here. I was like, oh yeah. I said, well, I know all those guys, and I work with them all. So I noticed like I'm not a technical person. Like I don't do tech, but I was fascinated by the pioneers, by the people who saw something when there was nothing there. The people who really felt like I was talking with Sherry McKenna, who's a producer. One of the producers at Pixar, and also at Digital Productions, and she was saying about how she says my final revenge right now is I can walk out on the street, stop somebody, and go, "Do you know what CGI is?" And I go, "Yeah, computer graphics." He goes, "In 1984, nobody knew what the hell you were talking about."
Yeah.
Nobody ever heard of that.
Yeah.
I was like, that's how rapid the change was. And even when I was interviewing the pioneers, I said, Jurassic Park was 25 years ago, and they were like, "Oh yeah." like it didn't dawn on, like, the revolution's over. The revolution's in the rearview mirror. Like it's like really, if you peg like what's like the Gettysburg of CG, or the Jazz Singer, where everything changed. It's like Jurassic Park, Toy Story. Some folks say Terminator 2. That was like another big, really, because the CG effects blended with the live action. Some with the Abyss. The little water character stuff.
Yeah.
That was early. Like it's CG, but it looks. It perfectly matches with the live action. But Jurassic was the one that really changed everybody's minds. Where, like I always said, like before Jurassic, if you were making a movie and you say, "Let's use computers," your producer would go, "That's ridiculous." After Jurassic, you'd say, "Let's make a movie without computers," and your producer would go, "That's ridiculous."
Yeah.
And that's the real changeover that happened. And recently on cable, I saw the first Jurassic Park, and it holds up. It still looks really good.
Yeah, I watched it. I think last year. Well, like we were all closed in for the pandemic and all that. So I remember that was just one of the movies on, and I watched it. It was good. You know, I got to be honest. I didn't see it in the theater when it first came out. I didn't see it until, I don't know, it was on videotape at some point, and I don't know if I enjoyed it, but I don't know if the effect was lost on me because I didn't see it on such a big screen.
Yeah,
but,
it is a big screen movie. You look at it, and you're like, wow, it's really good.
But I mean, believe me, I was impressed with what I saw. I just don't think I had that same reaction that the entire, world had seeing it live in the theaters.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. And I was talking with Phil Tippett, and Phil has done terrific work, like Dragon Slayer and was it Starship Troopers and things like that. And he was originally heading up the unit at ILM that was going to do the dinosaurs the old-fashioned Ray Harryhausen way.
Okay.
They're going to do the little clay maquettes with the armatures, and you move them frame by frame and do it that way. And then two guys had done like a guerrilla test, like they'd done a test just using pure CG and everything with no stop motion in it. And when Spielberg saw that, it blew his mind. He was just like, "Wow, it's great. We've got to do the whole picture like that," And Steven said to Phil, he goes, "Phil, what do you think?" He goes, "I think I've just become extinct." and Steven goes, "That's a good line. Can I use that?" And he actually put it in the movie. Jeff Goldblum says it at one point. I think we've just become extinct.
That's hysterical.
When Ray Harryhausen saw Jurassic Park, I had a friend with him, and when they came out of the theater, they said, "What do you think?" He says, "Oh, it's beautiful. I've never seen anything like it. It's incredible." He says, "Well, it's a stop motion animator. How do you react?" He goes, "Well, as a stop motion animator, I think me and my colleagues should find a very large mountain and jump off." But the weird thing is that in the years since Jurassic, there's a lot of stop motion now.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Coraline and the Aardman films and Laika and Kubo and the Two Strings, and there's a lot of great stuff being being done. Yeah. So it didn't really kill it completely. So
no, I think Nightmare Before Christmas kind of brought it back for people.
Yeah. I mean, I've never done stop mo. I wouldn't have the patience, to kind of lean over a thing and move a little tiny thing.
It's annoying. I've done it before, mostly in college, and I have done I don't want to call them pro work, but I've done a few pieces that that appeared on the web years ago. It's not my favorite type of animation.
Yeah. Well, my hat's off to the people who do that.
Yeah.
One of the other anecdotes that Harryhausen said that I love was he was animating on Jason and the Argonauts, and he had 9 skeletons all in one shot, all fighting, at the same time. And he got up to get a coffee, and he came back to the table looking down on it and go, "Did I shoot that frame already?" It's you're like, oh. Because there was no videotape recall it then. They were shooting film, so it's like
So tell us about the other book, Drawing the Line: The Untold Story of Animation Unions from Bosco to Bart Simpson.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that came from a lot of times when I would be sitting, getting a chance to work with the Golden Age generation, and we were talking about when they founded the animation unions, and the original thought was in 1941 there was a very contentious strike at Walt Disney's of the cartoonists, so it's the artist strike, and I noticed that the people who were pro Walt or pro union were still mad at each other. They're in their 80s. They're like these really old people, I mean, people that I was mad at 40 years ago, I don't care anymore. I was just but these guys were still like, and I was like,
it's wow. They're totally different generation, and they can hold a grudge.
I was like hanging out with Maurice Noble, and Maurice was the was the director. He was the art director of Chuck Jones. He's the reason why all the Roadrunner cartoons look the way they do.
No, I know. I have his book, The Nobel Approach.
Yeah,
I have I've read his
fantastic.
biography. I mean,
Yeah.
without him, he was. I remember reading in, I don't know if it was biography or The Nobel Approach, but he was the guy who said, "Let's get out of trying to make our animations look like Disney. That our characters are the stars, and let's make them pop." And they started stylizing backgrounds more and more. So.
Yeah. So the thing with Maurice was that Maurice was very pro labor and everything, and he was very pro union, and and there was a lot of other ones like Bill Melendez, who directed Charlie Brown Christmas and everything. He was involved in the strike. And Walt Kelly, who did Pogo, and all these folks, and then there was the pro Walt Disney guys like Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. The Nine Old Men guys and stuff like that. And it's just interesting because I was talking with Maurice, and I said I was working at Disney at the time, and I said, Maurice, let me call a bunch of why don't you come over to the studio for lunch and have lunch at the commissary, and I'll call some of your old proteges, the guys they call the Noble Boys. Like like Rob Minkoff, who directed Stuart Little and Brad Bird, and all these folks in the Kelly Asbury and stuff. They were all his proteges, and Maurice goes, "No, I might run into Frank Thomas." And I was like, wow, you guys are still pissed. Wow.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and so that stuff just fascinated me, where that came from. Is how like animation, like you find a lot of art. There's the art and commerce, like there's the people who with money, like if every person wants to make money, every person wants to make art. There's about 10 people want to make money off you making art.
Yeah.
And it's like, are you treated fairly? Rembrandt died broke, Vermeer died broke, it's like, Van Gogh was famous after he was dead, it didn't happen while he was alive. So just getting into the minutia and everything of how this movement started, it's kind of fascinating. A great story about Bill Melendez, and that was Bill was, his father was a colonel in the Mexican army, and he was raised in Hollywood, as a child, and his real name was like Cuauhtemoc Guillermo Javier Maria. Like he had like 6 names, 6, 7 names and everything. Melendez. And everybody just called him Bill. And he was saying when he was working at Warner Brothers, at one point the studio sent down a memo and said no more nicknames. Like people have to have their formal names on credits. So Chuck Jones became Charles M. Jones, and Fritz Freleng became Isidore Freleng. And Bill, just to be a wise guy, used to use like 2 of his names. So when you look at screen credits, I see the animator, and it says G. Melendez, W. Melendez, G.W. Melendez, L. Melendez. That's all him. That's just Bill. He was being a wise guy. So
that's funny. So actually, I think that was a nice story. I don't know. Is there anything more you want to say about the book? Or
okay. Well, I think it's very interesting to people who want to work in the arts and everything, and to find out that the old thing that they always say, it's not show art, it's show business. And there is a certain point where you're going to have to, and just because you're a good artist, you're a phenomenal artist, that doesn't mean you're going to sit down with a guy who came out of business school and haggle with him, one-on-one and get a super deal. That would be nice, but there's very few people who could do that. Charles Schultz, who did Peanuts, he was very good. He was a strong businessman as he was an artist. But that's kind of there's few and far between. Those stuff. Most people are like me or something, just like I don't know.
It's one of those things. I've been a freelancer since basically I was a teenager. I had to learn business on my own. I had to go through everything and see, oh, I made this mistake, I lost that client, or I didn't do something right,
Yeah.
and it was a learning process,
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
It's like James Cagney wrote in his memoirs when he first came out from New York to work in in gangsters, gangster pictures. Warner Brothers signed him to a contract to make that he was making $500 a week. And in 1931 or 32, that was a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's like, you could get a steak dinner for 75 cents.
Yeah.
And like, gas was a penny a gallon. So it's like that was a lot of money back then. So he felt really good. So he was mingling around. He got to meet other stars, and he met Edward G. Robinson, who was the other guy doing gangster movies. And he's like, "Hey, this is great. It's great job," because I'm making $500 a week. And Edward G. Robinson goes, "I'm making $5,000 a week." And Cagney goes, "I want to renegotiate my contract." And Jack Warner goes, "You're a communist." and that's Hollywood in a nutshell. So
yeah. It sounds like a very fun book. This is something, like I said, I'm interested in the old time of Hollywood. I love animation history. I've heard stories about some of the like the strikes that have happened, but I don't know as much detail. And this sounds like a fun book to pick up and read.
Yeah, I mean, the thing, like when I was working at Filmation on the He-Man show and all, a lot of times, you would go for lunch or a beer or something with a few older artists, and there was two wonderful guys named Pete Alvarado and Bob Gibbons, and Pete Alvarado was a layout artist for Chuck Jones, and Bob Gibbons was also a designer animator. Bob created the first Bugs Bunny model sheet and everything. So like the first design, like this is Bugs' bunny and everything. There was a designer named Bugs Hardaway who was originally from Chicago and everything. Mm-hmm. So everybody joked around about Bugs Moran being like one of the Al Capone's, nemesis. So when Bugs Hardaway designed this character, they called it Bugs' bunny. That's where it came. But anyway, just sitting having beers with these guys, they would tell you all these great stories, and they go, someday somebody should write all this stuff in a book, and I'm like,
that'll be me.
yeah, and it's like, are we allowed to do swear words in podcasts? Will people?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I tell people be who you are. I tend not to curse on when I have a bad mouth off the air, but on the air I try to be as clean as possible. But you guys be you.
Okay. Well, we'll just throw one in where Pete told me, he goes, Leon Schlesinger was the producer of the Looney Tunes. And Pete said, I remember Leon Schlesinger's most oft-quoted phrase, "I'm going to Palm Springs for the rest of the week and fuck you all." And you won't see that in a book.
That's funny. That is great. There's still more things I want to talk about, but I want to talk, you mentioned the word animation renaissance. I said, people talk about the Disney Renaissance. You were there. We don't have to go into too much detail, but I was curious, what was it like working at the studio when this changeover was happening? Because, you're coming from these movies that were, financial flops for the studio. Mm-hmm. They're thinking of closing the door. Roy says, absolutely not. This is what we're doing. They, I've seen the documentaries and things that have been made about it, and watched some stuff and read some things, but I've never spoken to anyone who was there during that change. What was it like? What was, was there a change in storytelling freedom, or, the way you guys interacted? What was it like working at studios during that time?
Yeah, well, I think it's like, before the takeover, there was a lot of like with the group before that, there were young people trying to do stuff, but there was some very entrenched, very conservative group that had been there when Walt Disney was alive, and literally it was like people would say, "What would Walt do? What do you think Walt would say?" And at one point, you got to go, "Guys, the guy's been dead for 20 years." It's like, life has moved on. Society is different now, than it was. People in rock and roll aren't sitting around going, "What would Glenn Miller do?" It's like, No, it's different.
Yeah.
You got to think of that. And at one point that you had to move that kind of like thinking to the side and think about impact and reaching an audience. Also, I think the surprising thing was up until Mermaid, and animated films just did okay. Like they did all right. Like it's like that's why like when Steve Jobs bought Pixar, in 1986, he wasn't expecting Toy Story or anything like that would make billions. Because
Yeah.
animated films didn't make that kind of money. Animated
Yeah.
films made back their budget, and they made the profit off of video cassettes and merchandising. That's where the profit came in. And with Disney, they've tied into the parks. And so when we were doing Mermaid, and our executive Jeffrey Katzenberg said, "This is going to be the first $100 million box office animated film." We're like, "That's crazy. That's never going to happen. That kind of we don't make that kind of. That's like Spielberg money. We don't make that kind of. Like even when even when Who Framed Roger Rabbit did 150 million, people said, "Well, that's Robert Zemeckis and Steven Spielberg." Because Robert Zemeckis had just done, Back to the Future and Romancing Stone, and he was very hot. He was like one of the hot directors at that time, so people could excuse that. But like an animated film making that kind of money, we didn't see it. And then it was a huge hit. And then when we started, we did Rescues Down Under, which is great, and Mickey's Prince and the Pauper. And then we started on Beauty and the Beast, and we said, well, Belle's not as she's not the same kind of character that Ariel is, and maybe people won't like her as much. And I hope this works out. The music's really good, and then it was a gigantic hit. And you're like, wow. And the weird thing was, you would go to a local theater on a Wednesday night, like 10:30 show, and it's sold out, and there's a line. It's all adults, and it's like this is a date movie, like wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was that was 92 or something, I think, when that came
91.
out?
Yeah.
91, yeah.
Beauty.
I was 15, I think, at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember watching it, and when she sings, I think it's the reprise of Provincial Life, and she runs out in the field, she's kind of turning, always reminded me of Sound of Music. And,
that's still it.
And you forget at that moment that you're kind of watching an animation. I don't know if it's because it reminds me of Sound of Music so much, but like at that moment, I feel like Belle's a real person, just in her movement, in her song, and everything. It's just,
it just clicked. Yeah, it also clicked. And then when we started Aladdin, and we said, well, Aladdin isn't as strong a love story as Beauty and the Beast was. And it's more of a burlesque. It's more like a format for Robin Williams to do his comedy, and the humor is more broad than the Beauty and the Beast. So maybe we won't do it as well. And that was a gigantic hit. So like it's funny because on the outside people go, "Oh, Disney just turns out hit after hit." On the inside, we're like, "How long is this going to last?"
Yeah.
Because you work just as hard on the flops as you do on the hits. And it's just like, wow, that one really hit. And like when I was working on Lion King, when we were creating the storyboards for the songs, creating storyboards for songs are like the hardest thing in a film, because on stage, a character could just stand there and go, and sing, and it's like, well, I paid my $300 to sit in this chair, and I want to hear 3 hours of singing. So so I will sit patiently and watch the person sing, but somebody on camera going, like, no, it's death. It's boring. So you got to give them stuff to do. And so when we're working with the music, you would just get a cassette of Elton John sitting at a keyboard going, "Day we arrive on the planet, da 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 da," and it's like, it's nice, but it's just him, and he's not throwing a lot into it because he's just singing the song, doing the song. Later on, Hans Zimmer and brought in Ladysmith Black Mambazo and the Zulu drums and all the orchestration, a huge thing. And when we finished Circle of Life, when we saw it in the theater, and again, that's another one, you see it in the theater, you're like,
Yeah.
Wow.
I got a funny Lion King story. Remind me to tell you after
Okay.
this, after you
Okay.
finish.
Yeah, you know, so it's coming up with stuff for them to do. So like, I storyboarded the Simba's children's song.
Okay.
I just can't wait to be king.
Yeah.
That one, and also the funny version of Can You Feel the Love Tonight,
Mhm.
where he's like, I can see what's happening. What? And they don't have a clue. He'll fall in love, and here's the bottom line: our trio's down to two. Oh,
Yeah.
that one. But it's interesting because when we first started the project, we go, okay, what do lions do? What do they actually do realistically?
Yeah.
They sleep, screw, and kill things.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, so sleeping is boring. We can't show mating,
Yeah.
and what's is killing things. And then we
Yeah.
find out female lions do all the hunting. Male
Yeah.
lions don't hunt. Male
Yeah.
lions just sleep and pee on the borders, and mark their territory. That's all they do, and mate.
Yeah.
That's what they do. So like, well, we got to come up with stuff for the lions to do that's interesting, So it was a challenge to like create this kind of to create this sort of action and everything, and yet still, and the other thing too was, Raggedy Ann and Andy, which was the first musical, was more of a musical like sort of showcase where when you did the songs, everybody just stopped and did the song. So they'd say da 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 da, and you do the song,
Yeah.
One of the things Howard Ashman, our lyricist, who was a genius, did, he came off Little Shop of Horrors, was he said the music has to advance the plot. Like people can't just stop and sing a song. That the story has to keep going and everything. You can't stop the plot for the story, And he was fantastic about that. There's a documentary that our friend Don Hahn did called Howard about on Disney Plus. And you should see it. It's excellent.
I watched it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, but Howard was really good at that. I remember at one point when our producer Jeffrey Katzenberg was going to cut part of Your World from Little Mermaid because he saw some kids yawning in a pre-screening, and he says, "Well, maybe it's and Howard was like, Jeffrey, I will strangle you." I will strangle you and spit on your grave.
And it's one of the most sung songs from the
Yeah, and I mean that's an old Hollywood thing. It's like in Wizard of Oz they were going to cut Somewhere Over the Rainbow at one point because they had said, well, it really doesn't advance the plot. She just stops and sings a song, and then the plot goes on. But that's what you remember. That's the scene. So so there's always this tug of war going on, back and forth all the time about what works and what doesn't, and there's always songs that get cut. There's sometimes they're beautiful. They're like really beautiful songs, but they don't fit. So it's like, oh well,
yeah. Well, so let me tell you my Lion King story. I think you'll get a kick out of this.
Uh-huh.
So in 1994, when the movie came out, I just graduated high school and I was working for the Disney store in our local mall. And one of our jobs that we had to do was see any Disney movie that came out, and they'd reimburse us our ticket so we can talk to the guests and be like, oh yeah, no, know the characters and all this stuff. So I go in the same mall across, to it's like diagonal. I go into the theater after work, and I'm sitting there watching the movie, and I had my leg up on. It wasn't crowded, but it was enough that there were spaces between people and chairs, and I had my leg up on the chair in front of me, but like with my foot turned, in a little bit, like I wasn't above, where I could hit someone. I sat that way the whole time. When I got up, I fell right over. It turns out, sitting in the theater for 90 minutes with my foot like that, I sprained my ankle.
No. Oh,
it's the funniest. And luckily, behind me was a family who was always at the Disney store, and I helped them so much. They helped me up and helped me get to a seat right outside the theater.
yeah.
And then I limped back after I rested a little. I limped back to the Disney store to get my reimbursement. But it was, I'm like, I sprained my ankle sitting and watching The Lion King in the theater, and just because. Dumbest thing I've ever done in my life. But I was so comfortable.
That's great.
And I've never sat that way again in a theater.
Well, there's an old phrase. John Huston, the famous director of the Maltese Falcon and the African Queen and everything. His saying about being a director was, he says, when you go in the theater, if I can make you forget who you are and where you are for 90 minutes, I've done my job.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true.
That's fantastic.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, the whole point of film is escape. It's like if you're sitting there, you're still thinking about, business, or I got to go shopping or something like that, then the film's not getting you. A good film just grabs you, and holds you until it's done. So.
I'll be honest. I saw, was it the Greatest Showman in the theater?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was, I think, the day after I lost a job. I was let go from a job that I was at for a while, and I was very upset about it. Mm-hmm. And my wife's like, let's just go to the theater. Within 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, I wasn't angry for that whole movie. And I felt, that movie did that. So I completely get it. It's a very smart thing. And let's move on a little bit. You've been a teacher for a very long time, and I'm an educator as well. I've done art professionally. I still do art professionally, whether it's illustration, animation, whatever. You've done art professionally. You're an educator. So you started teaching in the 80s, correct?
Yeah, just at night. Yeah, just a little bit.
I just want to. Pam Rose says, "Hey Tom."
Hey Pam.
So, what made you decide to go into education?
It's funny. I think I must have always had a predilection for it, because even early, even when I was still in college at SVA, I said, like, my teacher was Harvey Kurtzman, and Harvey, of course, created Mad Magazine and all, and was like one of the great, cartoonists of the era. And I think he recognized in me because he made me like his assistant. And we would always go for a beer or something after class before he got the train back to Mount Vernon, and we would talk about this kind of stuff. And sometimes when he wasn't well, he would have me sub the class. So and it's interesting, because the thing I tell other professionals is that, like, everybody thinks teaching is one way, which is like you're just giving them information, but it's two ways. It's like you're giving them information and experience, but you're getting off on their energy, because with them it's all about the future, and it's all about things to come and all, and they're going to carry on what you've done, and the people before you, and and I look at them and I go, oh yeah, this is fun. I forgot. And I realized too that a lot of the artists who taught me, like Sheamus Culhane and Richard Williams, and there's a wonderful man named Benny Washam, who was a Chuck Jones animator, who was a great tutor, and they taught us stuff not just because they liked us, but because they wanted to know that this information that they gave us will go on, so their legacy will go on to future generations and not just die out, in one generation. And also, I feel like I'm paying them back. Like, I feel like I'm getting my, my debt settled and everything. And after a while, like, it feels good when, like, one of my former students was nominated for Academy Award this year. Actually, two. Actually, like, one was nominated, Eric O, was for his short film, and then and another one named DeLon Warren worked on the Oscar-winning one. So that feels great when you're like, oh,
like, no, that's amazing.
Yeah, you get your daddy licks in. You're like, wow, that's my kid.
No, I grow attached. I still keep in contact with some of the students I've taught regularly. And I'm always so thrilled when I see them, like, post on social media about whatever project they're working on or job, and they're succeeding at stuff. It's like, wow. I had a guy write me about a month or so ago, and I really got to sit down, and he has a webcomic out. I haven't had a chance to really sit down and read, but he's like, you were my teacher at this school, and you taught me so much, and I've put it into this comic, and
Yeah.
Let me know what you think.
Yeah.
And I've skimmed it, but I haven't had a chance to really sit down and read. But the artwork is gorgeous. The
Yeah.
artwork is
Yeah.
gorgeous.
My lip sync assignment, I mean, when I teach animation, the lip sync assignment I use for like first time doing lip sync is I sampled a statement from the James Whale 1931, The Invisible Man,
Mm-hmm.
and everything with Claude Rains, because
Yeah.
Claude Rains had very good pronunciation and everything.
Yeah.
And there's a scene where the landlady comes in and starts throwing his stuff out of his lab and everything, and Claude Rains goes, "Leave that alone and get out of here." And so to this day, like all the classes I've taught and stuff, you just go to somebody and go, "Leave that alone and get out of here." Everybody goes, "Oh, I know what that is."
That's great. Yeah. Now, when you started teaching, were you just strict teaching animation? Did you do other things? Like, what are the type of courses you teach?
Well, I started with teaching just like regular 2D animation theory.
Yeah.
And then I also teach storyboard,
Mm-hmm.
and then I also teach a course, I created a course around the computer book called The Rise of Digital Hollywood.
Okay.
We're talking about the evolution of computer graphics, because you can't, with computer graphics, you can't just pick like one Walt Disney person, and go, okay, George Lucas rubbed the lamp and Pixar popped out, and that's why we have and like, no, it doesn't work that way. It's like a Russian novel. There's like avant-garde artists, there's universities, there's the military, flight simulators. Flight sims was a big deal. So like in the 60s, when you had the controls of a jet plane, you turned the wheel and the ground moved in real time. Yeah. That's a complicated algorithm for the 1960s. But the military had it first, and then usually the government had a program called DARPA, which is Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And DARPA does a lot of this breakthrough stuff, like Teflon and non-scratch eyeglass lenses and stuff. And they did some like very early graphics. And the folks at the Jet Propulsion Lab in 1979 did these simulations for the Voyager spacecraft. Because Voyager took off. In the 2 years it took it to get to Saturn or Jupiter, they said, what if it gets there and the camera doesn't work? Or what if there's some magnetic ionic disturbance that the transition, the transmittal of images doesn't come through? People are going to go, what did you spend $2 billion on? What's that thing doing out there? So he says, we need a simulator to explain what it's doing. And there's this brilliant artist, designer named Dr. Jim Blinn. And Blinn went through New York Tech and the University of Utah with a lot of the Pixar engineers. They were all buddies.
Okay.
So, and he was actually able to use a couple of them, and they created a simulation of the Voyager. And if you go on to Google, whatever, and look up Voyager flybys, and he said the storyboard was the flight plan. He says that's what we did, and the images were just so damn good that you were like, all you could think of was, who has the camera? Who's filming this? It was like they were that good, So, wow. So just getting all those stories in, and is I found fascinating, and it's a good lecture class. I have fun. So I do that and storyboarding as well. So
yeah. And when you just curious, what is like your favorite thing to teach? Or do you prefer lecturing? Do you prefer to sit and like teach animation where you're actually doing something? Or
well, for anybody who's been watching the show up till now can see I like to tell stories. So yes. so a lot of it is, and when you think about it, history started as storytelling. Homer was a storyteller, and the Icelandic skalds, the heroes, the sagas and stuff. It's storytelling.
Yeah.
And the thing with computers was, I always joke about there was a Greek writer named Polybius who wrote a history of the Roman Empire right at the time that Julius Caesar was around, and he basically, as a Greek, was explaining to other Greeks and Egyptians, who the hell are these Roman people and why are they taking over? where did they come from?
That's great.
So I figured as a 2D animator, I'm like, where did all these digital people come from?
Yeah.
And why are they running everything now? Like,
That's funny because I'm kind of the same way when I teach. I actually am like you. I prefer to lecture, just talk and tell stories, and I like engaging with the students, have them ask questions and come around. One of my favorite class to teach was a storytelling class because we just sat around and told stories, and I taught them how to turn them into scripts, into storyboards, how to do all this stuff, and it was fantastic. But yeah, no, and you're right. I love story. It's always story first, and I think that's the important thing. So I think that's also why it's one of my favorite to teach. I just love that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, there was an animator named Don Bages years ago. It was a studio named Bages Jones, and he had this great line that should be written in blood on the walls of many studios. He said, "Animation could do anything except save a bad idea."
I like that.
Isn't that good? That's really good. It's true. It's like you can have superb animation, but if the basic idea is like, then like, that's it. And then other times, a strong writing can carry weak animation. Like the old Rocky and Bullwinkle show. Like if you watched Rocky and Bullwinkle and you turned off the sound, the graphics were very kind of it was very clunky, but it made you laugh and everything. And it still was funny. So.
Oh yeah, and that has to do with not, I don't know, just story, but the way it was, I think, recorded as well. It really felt like an old radio show. You didn't need the animation on there to enjoy Rocky and Bullwinkle. Very few visual gags, So true. It was great stuff. I want to ask, what was? See, now I have a remembering. What was your first animation that you saw that said, "I want to be an animator"? Do you remember that? Do you remember getting that feeling and seeing something and being like, "This is what I want to do"?
I think about that and everything because I mean, I watched all the Saturday morning cartoons. I was one of those kids with the bowl of cereal parked in front of the TV set, just watching all the cartoons go by and everything. I think like in 1973, whatever, I had already started doing stuff, but there was a show at Lincoln Center in Manhattan for the 50th anniversary of the Disney studio. And Disney's had this traveling show where they talk about through their studio. But what they did is they brought the working reels of the movie they were working on at the time. And it was Robin Hood. It was Disney's Robin Hood. So they had like the first reel of Robin Hood in rough. So you just saw rough animation and storyboards. Rather than the finish, and what there's a beauty to really good rough animation. It's like pure thought on paper. You're watching thoughts, going by, and it's and actually it actually feels a little diminished when it's cleaned up and painted. Like I liked it in its rough form. And when you see stuff like that, you're like, wow. That's really good.
Well, there's also more, I think, when you're looking at the pencils and the roughs, you're seeing more emotion. You're seeing more, you're seeing kind of just the pure gesture that someone's just trying to get down, and then just let's clean this up and get it tight. Because I always feel every time I draw, I'm much more like a penciler than an inker. You know what I mean? Like I prefer my roughs over anything. That I do.
Yeah, because it's raw thought. It's like raw inspiration, And when you could get that, through to a film, I think the last time I saw something like that impressed me that way was 3 years ago. There was a Japanese movie called The Adventures of Princess Kaguya. Okay. And there's a scene where the princess has these robes and everything, and she runs away from a party, and she like there's a reception or something, and she runs for it and breaks through some paper, screens and everything, and with her, and it looks like it was animated very, very dynamically, just like it may have been directly on the cells, because I don't think it was digital, but the animation has a raw energy to it that you're like, wow, that was good. Yeah.
I've never seen that. I don't think I've even heard of that one. Is it something?
It came out a couple of years ago and everything. I remember because like when the Lego movie didn't get a nomination for Oscar and stuff, people complaining, why didn't the Lego movie get a nomination? I'm like, Princess Kaguya just kind of came out of nowhere.
I gotta look that up. I mean, I try to keep on top of everything, watch as much as I can, but
it's a good film.
There are things that slip through the cracks.
Yeah. So. Well, that's the other thing too. Is like, again, show how the times have changed. When I'm like one of these old guys. When I was a young guy, and it's like, when I was when I started in animation, in a year you'd have like maybe 2 animated films. There'd be like the Disney film, and there'd be one other one. So there'd be like a Bakshi film, or Fantastic Planet, or Yellow Submarine, something like that. That was it. Now there's like for the last 10 years or more, there's been like 24 animated features a year. There's been like 2 a month, and everything. Just keep another one. Every month there's like 2 more releases. So there's a lot of stuff to keep up with nowadays.
Yeah, my Netflix is got a lot on my list. I just start adding to my list. I do the same thing on Hulu, everything. It's like new animation, let me just add it. And one day I'll get to it.
Yeah.
So
that's the problem. Yeah.
But when I'm working in the studio here, I have an extra monitor. If I'm not doing anything with sound, I'll throw up like something to watch while I'm working. So that's how I get through a lot of it. So one second, I just want to check one thing here. Whoops, wrong monitor. I'm sorry, I have 3 monitors. I never know where the hell I am here. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your website. You have a blog, but it doesn't really discuss like I would have thought you would have been like writing really about animation, but you kind of give like what's going on in history or like around that time. Can you tell me like how this started? I'm very curious because I was flipping through a couple of pages and looking at like what's going on. It's like, where do you pull this information from? How much research are you doing on this? Yeah.
Well, I think like I started keeping my own records like oh God, it's got to be like 30 years ago or something. But then a good friend of mine, Scott Johnston, who was one of the engineers who worked on the Wildebeest Stampede and Lion King, which showed me how to create my own database and stuff, just create my own almanac. So I just started writing down dates, things that I found interesting, and I look for stories that have a personality to them. Just a dry date like this person died, this person did this. It's not that interesting. But when you find something interesting, like the Renaissance French King Charles VIII, who invaded Italy in 1495 and made Leonardo had to run for his life. He didn't die in battle. He died in his castle, walking down a flight of steps, and he banged his head on a low doorway. like that's interesting. Like I find that interesting.
It's fun stuff. Like just looking at today, in 1944, a fire broke out in the main tent of Ringling Brothers Circus during a children's matinee in Hartford, Connecticut. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm just like, you have another one, 1925. Walt and Roy Disney deposit $400 on a lot located at 2719 Hyperion Avenue. So it's like this is the day they like bought the building. And
I find stuff like that fascinating. What would have happened? Like I was talking with some friends recently about for Independence Day, and I remember there was a story about when the revolution first broke out. The older Prime Minister William Pitt the Elder, who was called the architect of the British Empire, he was the Prime Minister when they fought the 7 Years' War, which we call the French and Indian War, where England got Canada and India. Well, he was retired, but then when the revolution broke out, he came out of retirement to put forward a plan, and it actually sounded like it could have worked. You know, he said, if you want peace with the Americans, he says, recognize their Congress as an autonomous regional parliament and give them seats in the English Parliament, and that probably would have worked. You know, because at the time, John Adams said only about a third of the American public really wanted independence. Like John Adams said, a third was hot for independence, a third was for staying with the crown, and the rest were fence sitting and like didn't really have an opinion. You know, and when you think about the ramifications of that, you know, like what happened is they voted down his plan in Parliament. The government party like killed it. But if it had worked, then there wouldn't be a United States. There wouldn't be Canada because there was no reason to divide it. It would have been like the Dominion of North America, you know, let's say. And then the Louisiana Purchase wouldn't have happened because Napoleon was going to sell all that land to the English and everything. And then California probably would have stayed Mexican and Spanish. You know, so it's weird to think like how the world would have changed, you know, like what would be different and all. So, and we'd be like a big, like Australia or something, be like a big dominion, you know, kind of thing. So
that's amazing. You know, you don't think of things like that until you hear a story like you just said. It's you know, and you know that's I mean that's another story, a sci-fi book or something coming on. You know, it's I saw a little smile there. Is there a possibility on that? Or
Well, it's funny, and it's funny. I mean, you know, for all the nonfiction, I mean, for all the fiction fantasies I worked on and everything, I write a lot of nonfiction, and it's like I don't know. I think when your full-time job is fantasy, reality is where you go to relax.
I can't agree with you more. I tend to read more biographies.
Yeah.
The only thing I'll read that would fall under like fantasy outside of, you know, this is mythology, because I'm just such a fan of old time storytelling, and I'll read myths, I'll read fables, things like that. But I tend to go for biographies, how-to books, things like that. I want to learn something or do something different than the fantasy world I live in.
Yeah, it's like you know, I got into Game of Thrones, and I watched the whole series and stuff, and it's beautifully done and everything, you know, and but I remember like when I'm watching and I'm thinking, this is the War of the Roses.
Yeah,
this, you know, Lancasters and Yorks, Lannisters and Starks, you know, and the Byzantines used to have a thing like you know, in the Battle of Blackwater Bay, there's that flamethrower, that stuff that explodes and it's green fire and it's a big giant thing.
Yeah.
Well, the Byzantines, the ancient, the medieval Greeks had this thing called Greek fire, and it was like this napalm kind of like naphtha thing that they shot out of tubes and stuff, and they kept it a secret. They kept it such a secret that people are still guessing as to what it exactly was.
Really?
But it's like going, oh, that's Greek fire. Okay. Like, and you know, and you watch all these things and sitting there going, oh yeah, the Targaryens, yes, the Plantagenets. Okay, so and, you know, and that's cool. You know, it's okay to do variations, just like Foundations that's coming up. You know, Asimov's Foundations was you know, decline and fall of the Roman Empire. You know, put into outer space. You know, and then and you know, and I think. You know, there might have been a certain amount of inspiration for it in Star Wars and everything. You know, because those books were popular when George was in college. You know, and you know, and I think in the second Foundation, there's a character called the Mule, who's the general of the Imperial armies, who wears all black and has supernatural powers. Yeah.
Interesting.
We ever heard that before? So, and I mean, it's okay. You know, it's an homage. You know, just like you know, Lion King was Hamlet, and Pocahontas was Romeo and Juliet. You know, we just did a variation on it, and it's like, you know, it's okay. You know, because the stories are universal.
Yeah, and you know, it's. I've always said, and I say this when I'm teaching, you're going to be influenced by the things that you love.
Yeah.
You know, and you're going to pull from it as long as you're not completely copying. I mean, I remember teaching a game, not a game, but a course on video game development. and I went back to the old Super Mario Brothers, the original game that came with the NES back in the 80s. And I'm like, look, it was just a regular side scroller, right? And you had to collect these coins and avoid these creatures. And then what happens a few years later? Sega comes out and gives you Sonic. Now you're a hedgehog collecting rings, avoiding the other things. But what they do, they fix it that you can go backwards a bit. So they're like, because I don't think you went backwards till Super Mario 2 or 3 on the NES. But like when Sega came out and gave you Sonic, it's like it's Super Mario Brothers just as a hedgehog. Yeah. And I'm like, that's the thing. They took what worked and just made it their own.
Yeah. It's like in the computer book, I have a chapter on games. And I was describing how like Donkey Kong was created and everything. It was the designer Shigeru Miyamoto. It was a big fan of Popeye cartoons. Like he loved when he was a kid, he watched Popeye, and it was Popeye, Bluto, and Olive Oil.
I'm sorry, you froze for like a minute. You were saying you were talking about Donkey Kong, and then
yeah. Well, so I'm saying that the designer Shigeru Miyamoto was a big fan of Popeye cartoons. And in Popeye cartoons, there's always Popeye's a little man, and there's this big giant guy who grabs his girlfriend and runs away, and Popeye has to go save her, and the big guy's throwing things at him. Yeah. So he thought, okay, I'll do this, and his supervisor said, well, this game won't be a hit in America unless it has a cool name. You have to give it a cool name. He goes, what are you going to call it? He goes, I was going to call it Stubborn Gorilla. And he goes, well, what's Stubborn Gorilla in English? He goes, I don't know. And he says, well, figure it out, So he looked it up, and he says, okay, what's gorilla in Japanese? Kong. Okay, then he was looking at words for stubborn, synonyms, and he saw one, Donkey Kong. So he called it Donkey Kong. And then when they sent the first prototype to a bar in Seattle, his American distributor said, "That's the stupidest name I've ever heard. Nobody's going to like that." The guy says, "That's so weird. Even my lawyer doesn't understand it." Well, tough. That's the name of the game. That's what we're going to use, And then the thing was a monster hit. I'm like, okay, well, obviously somebody likes it. So.
Yeah. It was great. I mean, how many games did they spin off of that? And but that's amazing. I didn't know that story about Donkey Kong.
Yeah, no,
I like that.
Yeah. Miyamoto was also behind a Legend of Zelda, and he was like one of the great designers, and he also helped push the Pokemon franchise.
No, I'm actually a big Zelda fan. I have a lot of the. I don't know if I have one behind me somewhere, but like the art of Zelda and all those. I love those type of books. They're just gorgeous.
Wow.
Gorgeous things in there.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
We have to start to wrap it up.
I was just about to say that, but I wanted to give you, because you have some really, really great stories. I think you need your own podcast, man. Where you sit and you tell stories, like Story Time with Tom.
Yeah. One more thing to do.
I was going to say we should start wrapping up. We're getting to almost the 2-hour mark. Before we start wrapping up, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't talked about yet?
Not that I can think of really. I think every film is a new challenge, and it's it's always interesting about how you have some big ones, you have some light ones. Like it's funny because when people will jump on a Spielberg movie, or they'll jump on a Zemeckis movie. Modern media has this idea that everything a genius can only make genius stuff. And it's like that's never been the case. I mean, Beethoven and Mozart wrote some clunkers. I mean, it's like, who remember? When you think of Beethoven, Beethoven's fifth, Beethoven's ninth. Okay, what about Beethoven's second? The other one. It's like every once in a while, Mozart wrote, Idomeneo, Prince of Crete. It's like nobody, you're right. But it's interesting. There was a philosopher in the 1920s named Max Jacobs, who once said, no one ever made a classic on demand. He said, no one asked Beethoven to write the Fifth Symphony. He was just writing the one after number 4, and the one before number 6.
Yeah.
But the 5th is the one that everybody remembers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's like that. It's like you just do work, just keep creating stuff, and then some things will hit and some things won't, and you're like, okay, you do your best, so
Yeah.
I mean for Lion King and things like that, I also worked on Yogi Bear the movie.
Mm-hmm.
When I was on that, I was like, it's not working. This isn't gonna work. I don't know.
Yeah.
But oh well.
There was an audience somewhere for it, right? It just wasn't classic Hanna-Barbera fans, unfortunately.
Yeah. And you just say to yourself, like, okay, if this thing's bad, it's not my fault. Like, I'm doing the very best I can.
Exactly.
I'm going to give it 100%.
Yeah.
And then and it's interesting because the crew, a lot of the effects crew who were working on Yogi Bear, the next film they did was The Revenant with Leo DiCaprio. Mm-hmm. The big bear that's tearing him apart.
Yeah.
And they got an Oscar for that. It's just like, so that's it. It's like one movie to another movie.
Yeah. That's the business.
Yeah. I was trying to think if there was any other Hanna-Barbera stories too, and everything, because Hanna-Barbera was a lot of fun. There was a lot of interesting people, and I remember one day I was working on the Godzilla Power Hour. And
I remember that as a kid.
Yeah, and I remember there was another animator and everything, and we met Ted Cassidy, who's Lurch from the Addams Family.
Yeah,
and he was the voice of Godzilla, which he means he just went a lot. But we met him in the parking lot, and like, I'm 6 foot, and my friend was 6'3", and the two of us were like,
yeah,
big guy, really big guy, but really nice. He was like a very pleasant person.
I've actually heard that about him. I'm gonna let you go, but here's what I'm gonna say. I'd love to invite you back some other time, and just we'll focus on stories that you want to tell, that you found fun throughout your career. If you're interested in doing that. You said there's a lot. We didn't touch upon Hanna-Barbera. Hanna-Barbera is one of my all-time favorite companies. I actually have a shelf. I have 4 shelves next to me devoted to Hanna-Barbera collectibles, mostly pop figures, because they're hard to find Hanna-Barbera collectibles these days. So I have very few. And I'm just I'm obsessed with Hanna-Barbera. And I knew you worked on things like Godzilla. I think it said the Flintstone Kids or something when I looked at IMDb, stuff like that.
And Super Friends and those things. Yeah.
So, I'll have you come back. We could talk about times at the studios that you thoroughly enjoyed, that were fun for you, and projects that you liked, all that. If you're willing, if you have the time. I know you have a busy schedule, so we'll figure that out. But I want to thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing everything that you did. I had a lot of fun. If you don't mind hanging out backstage, I will. I'll chat with you real quick when I sign off. Awesome. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me.
All right. You're very welcome. Anytime.
On this.
Yeah. You're good.
Right. Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, guys. So that was a very fun show for me tonight. I really enjoyed chatting with Tom. Don't forget to check out his website down below. Check out his books. All the links for his Wikipedia page and his IMDb are in there. You can get links to his books on his website. Really, just check it out. I got a great guy coming on next week. I believe, just look for the ads. I believe it's Bob Weber Jr., who is a cartoonist. And he's got a few things going on. He's the son of Bob Weber, who was Musamali. So, kind of comic legacy coming on next week. So tune in for that. Look for the ads. I'll see you all next week. You have a great rest of your day. Bye, guys.